On behalf of the officers of Arlington's Mayor and City Council, we'd like to welcome you to this Veterans Day event. Unfortunately, the mayor couldn't be here, so I'm standing in on his behalf, as well as my colleague, Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Victoria Farmeyer. The proclamation reads, whereas Veterans Day has its origin in the November 11th, 1918 armistice, which brought World War II to a conclusion, and whereas the Allied victory of World War I affirmed the strength of great nations acting together for high purposes, and whereas the people of the United States caused through their elected representatives the designating of November 11th as a federal holiday, in which 1954 became officially known thereas as Veterans Day, and whereas the Veterans Day continues to be celebrated and commemorated with solemn observance in honor of all Americans to have served their country in times of war and conflict, and whereas Veterans Day has become a significant part of American heritage as we recognize the millions of our citizens whose military service has had a profound effect on history, and whereas the courage, honor, sacrifice, dedication which veterans of the United States Armed Forces have displayed in the cause of justice, freedom, and democracy are worthy of recognition. Now, therefore, I, W. Jeff Williams, Mayor of the City of Arlington, Texas, and on behalf of the Arlington City Council, do proclaim November 11th, 2019 as Veterans Day, and as the day be observed with appropriate ceremonies and in honor of those who have served to preserve our principles of justice, freedom, and democracy. Thank you.
Congressman Ron Wright is a special addition to our program today. Congressman Wright is a sixth-generation resident of Tarrant County who represents the 6th District of Texas. He currently serves on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. An alumnus of UT Arlington, Congressman Wright has been active in city, county, and civic leadership positions for decades. Ron has been recognized with numerous civic leadership awards, such as Volunteer of the Year and Man of the Year for community service. He and his wife, Susan, have 3 children and 9 grandchildren. They live in Arlington, Texas, with their 2 labs, Belle and Bee.
Thank you. Thanks all of you for being here, especially you veterans. My freedom is a gift from God, but I get to keep it because of all of you who have worn the uniform of the United States military. So I salute all of you. I have a very special presentation to make, and I want to thank the organizers for allowing me the opportunity to do this. We have in Congress what's called the Congressional Veterans Commendation, and it's been around for several years, but has never been given in the 6th District. So this is the inaugural year for the Congressional Veterans Commendation here in the 6th District. This goes to a veteran who continues to serve their community after they're out of the military. And we literally have a room full of people that qualify for this. For our inaugural year, each year we're going to do a few throughout the 6th District of Texas. I was pleased to present the very first one Tuesday night at the City Council meeting to Air Force veteran Marvin Sutton. And again, this is for veterans who continue to serve their community after they leave the military. The first one I'm going to present today will come as no surprise to anyone. There aren't very many people in Arlington who have done more to show respect to our veterans, highlight our veterans, honor our veterans than Cleet McAllister. Cleet, would you come up? Hold it for me.
Yes, sir.
First,
Thank you, sir.
allow me to coin you.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
This is a Marine, by the way.
Thank you so much. Awesome. Surprise. Thank you so much. Thank you.
The next one, also not a surprise. This gentleman, believe me, is a force of nature. And he has done so much, not only for his country, but also for his community. He continues to work in the community here in Arlington, as well as local politics, heading up the Frederick Douglass Club. But this man is a lion. And what's interesting is he's a chaplain. And you just heard from him a moment ago. Chaplain Rich Stoglin, would you come up?
Thank you. Thank you. Very much. Thank you.
A Navy veteran who I think almost everybody in this room would know. And if you don't know Paul Falks, you certainly know his products because they're all over Arlington, including those huge monument signs you see at our border. Navy veteran Paul, come up. Paul has been involved in the Arlington community for years.
Thank you. What a surprise.
Yeah, just missed it. The last one today, and again, this is the inaugural year. It's starting a tradition. If you're a veteran and you're involved in the community, we'll get to you, believe me, but we're going to do a few of these a year. The last one this year, one of my favorite people in the world, also Navy veteran, Joe Way, where are you? Joe's been very involved in, he's a very active Rotarian, as a lot of these people are. But he's served on boards and commissions here in Arlington. He was on the founding board of directors for the Arlington Tomorrow Foundation, and just is a great guy. Joe, come up. Thank you all very much.
Thank you again, Congressman Wright. Another round of applause for the 4 honorees. We are pleased to have Sherry Persons with us today, along with many of her family, as we remember her late husband, Jim Persons, as well as Albert Ross, who launched the Arlington Veterans Memorials in Arlington Veterans Park. Now we would like to turn the program over to Judge Carr for a special introduction.
A person who I really didn't get to know that long, only about 4 years, and here's how I met him. and on behalf of my colleagues in the Cowtown Music Club, it's always a pleasure to be here. But so we're up there playing the Tennessee Waltz. We were commemorating the Korean War veterans, and here comes this fellow who's scurrying along with his walker about as fast as he can go. And so we're just playing along, and as he got closer and closer, we were wrapping up the song. Well, he had a little blue thing around his neck that I didn't recognize for a few moments because the eyes aren't what they used to be. And we wrapped up the song just as Colonel James Stone got up to where we were playing, and in that cute smile that he had, he snapped his fingers and said, "Darn, I was hoping to come up and sing with you guys on the last voice." Well, since that time, he swore in my son as a second lieutenant into the United States Army. And during my opportunity to know Colonel Stone, I also got to know his wife. And anybody who served in the military a long time knows that the family is also a big influence on the shaping and the support of our military personnel. Mary Lou Stone is a wonderful friend of mine, and when we were thinking about including, as we very happy to know that the Medal of Honor Museum is coming to Arlington. How about that? Okay. All right. And there are a lot of people in this room who had a large part in that. But I would like you to please, and Colonel Stone's picture is here, the picture with President Eisenhower placing the medal around his neck. If you Google the Colonel, and there's copies of the citations up here, it's just an incredible story of just unbridled bravery that was exemplified by someone who chose to call Arlington his home. Mary Lou, would you stand up and take us about? And I know she'd like to meet every one of you after the event is over. Thank you, Mary Lou.
Our keynote speaker today is Colonel Charles Moses, United States Marine Corps. His brief bio is included in your program. Please now listen to the Colonel.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the invite, and I'm very honored and humbled to be here today. This is a tremendous day, and we talked a little bit about history, and I would be remiss if I didn't talk about history first, and I'm very grateful that I get to talk before the history professor, so I'll do that now. So, like we heard on the 11th day of the 11th hour of the 11th month in 1919, 100 years ago, we first had an armistice, and if you look at our allies and you look at where we are today, we used to call this an Armistice Day, and then it was a Remembrance Day. In fact, most of our allies are doing the same thing today, and they call it Remembrance Day. And we heard a little bit about the dates, and that's very important. It went back and forth on when we would celebrate it. Very fitting to do it today on the 11th. And I want to congratulate our team for bringing this inside. They made this call very early, so I am grateful that I only have an hour prepared speech for all of you, and you're all seated, which is very different than when I did it at DFW a couple of years ago, so just bear with me. But today we pause the sacrifice for those who gave that ultimate sacrifice, who protected the bedrock of our freedom that we enjoy today. It's an honor to serve in the military, and it's incredible to see how it has evolved over time. And so today we enjoy an all-volunteer force. And it's an impressive thing to say because it's unique around the entire globe. We don't swear an oath to an individual. We don't swear an oath to a country. We swear an oath to an idea. And that's the Constitution of the United States. And it's unique in its own. Many of us that serve today and who have serve with that oath, and they join for many reasons. But they continue to serve because of the brothers and sisters to the left and right, their fellow service members, their allies to the right and to the left. And so before I go any further, I want to do what we normally do on these Veterans Day and recognize the fact that we have those that serve amongst us. And if you served in World War II, if we have any World War II vets, if you would just raise your hand or stand if you can so we can recognize you. What about the Korean War? I saw an individual wearing a Korean War hat. There we go, sir. Thank you for your service. All of you. What about the Vietnam War? Any people out there that served in the Vietnam War? Please stand. What about the Gulf War? Gulf War or Somalia? Please stand and be recognized. And the last two, how about in Iraq or Afghanistan? Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom. You're the tapestry of our freedom. You enjoy serving along, but to provide the blanket of freedom that we enjoy in our bedrock of our nation. And so it is a testament to your lethality and your precision for our survival. Our freedom provided by you as the veterans have stood the test of time. And what's amazing to me as I have served and I have been trained by many generations of warriors and combat veterans, it is always interesting to see that bond, whatever war, whatever contingency, whatever nation, whatever operation, that quest to ensure freedom is not unique. It is shared with our allies, it's shared amongst us, and it's something that we hold dear. I need only look at you that are out there that served before me. Me, I was trained by Vietnam vets. I know that I have gone out and trained others that exist and serve today. And what I have done is to continue that torch that you have trained us to serve under. It's one that is right. It's one that is a heavy burden. It is one that requires us to be giving to a degree where we might be tested by the enemy and be willing to show an ounce of courage so that those that stand to our left and to our right survive that conflict. Or those that are back at home survive because of what we have done on the battlefield for freedom, either for our homestead or for those that we fight for. It's a moral obligation. It's an ethical race. And I'm proud to see that what I have been trained by all of you, the World War II vets trained our Korean vets. Our Korean vets trained our Vietnam vets. Our Vietnam vets trained us. And so on and so forth. The legacy of the veterans that you share the room with today have ensured that this tapestry of warfighting remains. And that is a great honor. One of the things that we do to honor some of this courage is, and we talked a little bit about it today, is the Congressional Medal of Honor. The Medal of Honor is one of those and is the highest award that we can provide to an individual, and it predates Veterans Day or Remembrance Day. The Medal of Honor is a manner of character of our nation, and it embodies what we stand for, and it is embolized by the individuals that wear it. It has been awarded 3,508 times. There are 71 living recipients of the Congressional Medal of Honor. And in Texas, there's just shy of 70 awardees. And so it is impressive and a proud thing that I joined this Texas neighborhood to be part of where the National Museum of the Medal of Honor is coming. And you were chosen because you symbolize that which is greatest in our nation. Here, right here in Arlington, are a symbol of what is going to be reflected across the great United States. And so it's an incredible honor to hold the museum, but it's an incredible honor to understand what this medal represents. And as veterans, we understand that. We certainly understand about Colonel Stone and what he did. And so we're talking about that. And so I have this very large book of Congressional Medal of Honors winners. And I would be remiss if I didn't read the citation. I thought that Judge Carr was going to do that. But I'm going to prove that Marines can read. He's already proven that he has talents that take him way beyond just being a judge. And I think Marines do this because we probably don't know how long we're going to work, so we have to have many talents. But if you will, I'd like to read this citation about Colonel Stone, who received this as a first lieutenant, and this was in Korea. So he's actually from Pine Bluff, Arkansas, but he entered the service in Houston, so we own him as a Texas. So First Lieutenant Stone distinguished himself by conspicuous gallantry and indomitable courage above and beyond the call of duty. This is the standard citation start for the Congressional Medal of Honor in action against the enemy. When his platoon holding a vital outpost position was attacked by overwhelming Chinese forces, First Lieutenant Stone stood erect and exposed to the terrific enemy fire, calmly directed his men in the defense. A defensive flamethrower failing to function, he personally moved to its location, further exposing himself, and personally repaired the weapon. Throughout a second attack, First Lieutenant Stone, though painfully wounded, personally carried the only remaining light machine gun from place to place in the position in order to bring fire upon the Chinese advancing from two directions. Throughout, he continued to encourage and direct his depleted platoon in its hopeless defense. Although again wounded, he continued to fight with his carbine, still exposing himself as an example to his men. When this final overwhelming assault swept over the platoon's position, his voice could still be heard faintly urging his men to carry on until he lost consciousness. Only because of this officer's driving spirit and heroic action was the platoon emboldened to make its brave but hopeless last-ditch stand. We all know how the story ended. And Colonel Stone was one of those that was not posthumously awarded, obviously. So what he represents is a small part of the character and fabric of Arlington, or Texas. And this is an awesome thing to be part of today, for me as an honor to be here. There is no greater service than to serve each other. So, like I said, I'm going to do a little reading, and this is abnormal for Marines. I'm going to read twice. And I'm going to shock you probably a little bit more, but it's appropriate that we read something that won our allies. We're stronger with our allies, and as a nation, bound together. But what we find our allies do is remembering the reason why we celebrate freedom. In the War to End All Wars, in World War I, there was a poem that was written by John McCrae, and many of our allies read this on our day. I would like to join them in reading this in Flanders Fields. After I read this, I would like to take a small pause of silence and use this moment of silence to remember fellow service members that you serve with, that you know, and honor them, fallen, and they mark the ground of our nation in cemeteries here in the U.S. as well in Europe. So just a small moment of silence after the reading. In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow. Between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky, the larks still bravely singing fly. Scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow. Loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you, from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If you break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields. I guarantee you that we have continued to carry that torch. So a moment of silence. Thank you. The burden that we carry for those that have died and that have served is heavy, but it is people like you, veterans, that continue to carry that torch, that make a difference every day for those that do not serve. Thank you very much.
Colonel, we would like to present you with David Rolls' new George Marshall, Defender of the Republic, book endorsed by Generals Petraeus and McChrystal, and given an appreciation for your service to the nation, to the United States Marine Corps, and your words today.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Next, we will get a history lesson. Dr. James Sandy received his PhD from Texas Tech University, be sure to tell the mayor, and is adjunct assistant professor at UT Arlington, where he teaches courses in military and cultural history and serves as liaison for the history internship program. His new book, A War All Our Own, focuses on the nexus between the American way of war, irregular warfare, and the American Ranger tradition. Dr. Sandy?
Thank you, sir. It's an honor to speak with all of you here today as we celebrate our nation's veterans and our proud history of service and sacrifice. I promise to keep it short, right? We historians have a terrible reputation of speaking too long. I'll do my best. I was asked here to do a couple things. One, to speak about a few anniversaries we have going on in the historical discipline. And two, I wanted to speak very briefly of the impact of veterans and how we as historians and academics seek to include the veteran in the classroom and the academic process. November 11th, 1944, if you go back 75 years from this day, saw more than 11 million Americans in uniform in the Second World War, as the United States and our industrial might worked alongside the Allies in the defeat of the Axis powers. We saw 8 million men in the Army, more than 3 million in the Navy, and almost half a million in the Marine Corps. Still, countless more had already served or were on their way into the uniform. You go back 5 months from that, June 6th, 1944, D-Day, Operation Overlord, the opening of the Second Front. The significance of this is extremely difficult to capture, especially only when given 10 minutes. I urge you all to come take my U.S. military history course. I have lots of time to talk about it. We can go on and on. This cross-channel invasion cracked open Fortress Europe, Hitler's fortress, opened the Second Front that day in June, and along with Soviet advances on the Eastern Front, spelled the imminent defeat of the Third Reich and the end of the war in Europe. It's hard to imagine, it's hard to envision what an awesome and powerful sight the preparations and that day must have been. more than 5,000 ships and landing crafts came together to create the largest amphibious operation in the history of mankind. On that morning, that vast armada coordinated to land more than 130,000 Allied soldiers onto the beaches in Normandy, where they met some 50,000 German defenders. In support, more than 7,700 Allied aircraft flew in support, and 24,000 American and British paratroopers had been dropped that evening. The first Americans ashore landed at Utah Beach, members of the 4th Infantry Division. 6:30 a.m., the first boots hit the sand. Most of the landings were disjointed, bad weather. It's a lot to coordinate, right? And a few elements landed in their planned areas. The first senior officer ashore, Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., that Theodore Roosevelt Jr., didn't seem to mind where he was, and famously decided to start the war from here, and directed further waves to his position. He said they'd get it done. And they did. Utah fell rather quickly compared to other beaches. Omaha Beach, the second American responsibility, proved the most difficult. The 1st and 29 Infantry Divisions fought through intense terrain, sandbars that at some points stopped a landing craft 100 yards from the beach, and entrenched German defenders, a division strong. The fighting lasted into the afternoon on Bloody Omaha that day. By the end, 57,000 Americans had hit the beach between the two. By the end of that day, the beaches were held and the German military was almost on the run. The landings together suffered some 10,000 casualties across the 5 beaches, American, British, and Canadians. Estimates ranging somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 of those occurred on Omaha Beach, where the 1st Infantry Division carried the load. As we look back on this historic moment, it's hard to put it into scope. It's hard to imagine what it was like that day. 75 years ago, this tremendous moment occurred, and 5 months prior to that, 5 months post that, the Allied war machine had liberated France and was knocking on the door of Nazi Germany. The war was over. D-Day and the Normandy campaign, truly the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. Today, amongst many memorials and museums, many of them pictured in your program, the sacrifices marked by the Normandy American Cemetery and Memorial, where more than 9,000 American servicemen are buried from the broader Normandy campaign, a more powerful place I've not visited. This day stands out amongst many in American history where our veterans answer the call and do things that the rest of us can't. And as a history professor, I take it very seriously as my responsibility to integrate the story of veterans and our soldiers into the classroom, into my research, into my writing, because it's not a story about numbers and decisions. It's a story about men and women sacrificing themselves for the greater good, for our country. Now, I thought I was going sooner in the program, so some retreads here. But 101 years ago, the world celebrated the first anniversary of the end of World War I, a global celebration that became known as Armistice Day, first recognized by Woodrow Wilson in 1919. During the Cold War, Dwight D. Eisenhower and the American Congress worked to widen that reach to include veterans of the Second World War and the recently completed Korean conflicts. In 1954, the official record was changed to Veterans Day. In the words of Ike, quote, "I call upon all of our citizens to observe November 11th as Veterans Day. On this day, let us solemnly remember the sacrifices of all those who have fought so valiantly on the seas, in the air, and on foreign shores, to preserve our heritage of freedom, and let us reconsecrate ourselves to the task of promoting and enduring peace, so that their efforts shall not have been in vain." The words of Ike resonate particularly powerful today, as no other modern president knew more about the impact and sacrifice of American servicemen. That same year, 1954, the United States recognized the 10th anniversary of D-Day. As the Supreme Allied Commander during the war and chief planner of the operations to open the Second Front, no one was more suited than Ike to commemorate the landings and the event and what it means. This wasn't something Ike could celebrate. He famously was not seen in public that day. He released a short message to the nation and instead took the day privately to himself to mourn those he ultimately ordered to their fate on that windy, cold morning in France. As a military historian, I take the utmost pride and reverence for the conflicts which I teach, and even more so for the men and women that risk their lives to serve their country. I strive to teach the human aspect of war to my students, and while I never served, I have dedicated my career to the study of war and the impact it has on the people within it, both civilians, soldiers, and in between. I push my students to view the statistics as more than mere numbers, to see the weight of these conflicts, so that hopefully we can answer Ike's call to create and reach a more enduring peace and learn from where we've been in the past. Over the course of my career, I've interviewed more than 100 veterans whose collective service has stretched from the battlegrounds of World War II through to the modern conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. I work diligently to include these histories and interviews into my research and teaching. Several stand out when we hit anniversaries like this year. I had the distinct honor to interview two men who took part in the D-Day landings 75 years ago. Dan Farley and the 5th Rangers landed on Omaha Beach, where the famous and now motto of the Ranger Regiment, "Rangers Lead the Way," was supposedly coined. I interviewed Dan in 2010. I interviewed his compatriot, Leonard Lommel, who served with the 2nd Rangers, who, while Dan and the 5th were charging up the beach, Leonard was climbing the cliffs at Point Du Hoc, overlooking Utah Beach. They were both a joy to talk to, as all veterans are. And the funny thing that always happens is they were much more complimentary of each other than they were of themselves. They didn't really want to talk about what they did. They want to talk about what their buddies were doing over there. Happens every time. Rather talk about their friends and their comrades. I've had the pleasure to interview men like Colonel Ralph Puckett, General Kenneth Lear, two men whose influence on the Army is innumerable. Their service during the Korean and Vietnam conflicts set a foundation for the doctrine and organization of one of the most visible and influential units in the Army today, the 75th Ranger Regiment. As mentioned, I did my graduate work at Texas Tech University, way out there, 6 hours that way, where we house the Vietnam Center and Archive, the single largest depository of Vietnam War documents that's not owned by a government in the world. Last time I checked, we're up to 15 million pages digitized. Because of my work there, both in grad school and for the archive, I've had the honor to interview dozens and dozens of Vietnam veterans. Men like Joseph Welch, who served in the 4th ID's LERP program in '66 and '67. If you're unfamiliar with the LERPs, these men volunteered to hang out in the jungle by themselves for 4 to 5 days and try and find the bad guys. I've also had the opportunity to engage with and discuss the war with many veterans of the armed forces of South Vietnam, including my dear, dear friend, Mr. Con Lê. Mr. Con Lê was assistant director at the center for many years and was an advisor and translator on many of the trips that the center sponsors back to Vietnam. Mr. Con served in the ARVN as a lieutenant until the very end of the war in 1975, where he escaped on a floating door until he was rescued by the American Navy. He made a home here in Texas and now spans 4 generations. He retired a couple of years ago, very deserved. One last story for you, then I'll get out of here. In 2010, I had probably my greatest pleasure as a historian when I was granted the tremendous opportunity to interview a man named Vincent Melillo. While conducting research at the infantry school at Fort Benning on the Ranger Regiment, I ran into someone who introduced me to Vincent. To this day, my conversation with Vince remains one of the most treasured memories I think I'll ever have. He lit up the room and shared with me his life and his service after knowing me for 5 minutes. We talked for 5 hours. Vincent served with a fairly obscure unit, officially named the 5307th Composite parentheses Provisional end parentheses. Rolls right off the tongue, right? In the even more obscure arena of World War II called the CBI, China, Burma, India. Vincent Melillo was part of Merrill's Marauders, if you've heard of them. And in the spring of 1944, he and 3,000 young men fought their way across the dense jungles and sharp, razor-sharp mountain ridges of Burma. In 5 months, they covered more than 750 miles on foot, only supplied by airdrop. They took part in 5 major battles and more than 30 smaller engagements. They were always undersupplied. They were frequently outgunned in every battle. By the end of the campaign, only 130 of the original 3,000 men were left standing and combat ready. Enemy fire, disease, malnutrition, and the physical rigors of their tasks had devastated the ranks. Vince was one of the 130 left standing. He was a remarkable man. In 1943, he was serving with the 33rd Infantry in Trinidad, service in which he had volunteered for in 1940, when he answered a cryptic call for volunteers from President Roosevelt. It's my favorite part of this whole thing. The President of the United States has called for volunteers from experienced jungle troops for a dangerous and hazardous mission somewhere. That's all it said. Not a lot to go off. I asked Vince about that message, what made him volunteer. He and the rest of the volunteers, a third from the Caribbean, a third from the Pacific, and a third from stateside units, literally knew nothing about what they were being asked to do or where they were even going until they got off their transport to train in India. He said he wanted to go because the other guys were going. He wanted to stay with his friends. And he did go. He served with one of his buddies from the 33rd, Private Robert Landis, up until Landis's death early on in the campaign. Vince spoke to me very candidly about his friend Robert, his death in a Japanese ambush, and the small grave marker under which they buried him that day in a small village in Burma. Vince survived the campaign, retired from active service, that is, until the Korean War erupted 6 years later. After volunteering prior to World War II and then again for the Marauders, Vincent Melillo had done more than his fair share for his country. And yet, he volunteered for Korea anyway and served 3 combat tours with the 5th Regimental Combat Team as a sergeant and a platoon leader. He turned down a battlefield commission because he didn't think he was educated enough for it. I ran into lots of people that disagreed with that. His final combat tour was in post-war Korea in 1958. He joked with me that he tried to re-enlist for Vietnam when the time came, but the Army told him he had done enough. Vincent Melillo served his country for nearly 20 years in 2 pivotal conflicts. He volunteered at least 5 times for combat and won the Purple Heart and a Bronze Star. When I met Vincent, he was 92 years old, and the day before he'd hit a hole-in-one at one of the Fort Benning golf courses. Very proud of it. I confirmed it with his daughter. It did happen. Had to check. I maintained a relationship with Vince for the next 5 years until he passed of a heart attack in 2015 as one of the very few remaining members of his unit. I was honored to meet and talk with him and forge whatever kind of relationship I could. Today, we celebrate the end of the First World War, which was supposed to be the war to end all wars. Today, we celebrate those brave men and women who all too often have been asked to fight for the rest of us. They frequently return much older than when they left, having endured and seen things the rest of us cannot imagine. They literally sacrifice themselves so that the rest of us can live normal lives. They fight for our great country, they fight for peace, and they fight for a better world. Whether you served in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, or anywhere in between, we are indebted to you. Today and every day I thank you, our precious veterans, for what you have done and what I know you and the next generation of veterans will continue to do for us. Please join me in thanking them.
Thank you, Dr. Sandy. Mr. Han Nguyen joined the Republic of Vietnam Army after the 1968 Tet Offensive, becoming an artillery officer in I Corps. He went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for advanced training in 1972 and returned to I Corps Artillery Headquarters. He spent 7 years in a communist prison after the fall of Saigon. Mr. Nguyen came to the U.S. in 1992 and serves as a paralegal for a Dallas law firm.
Good morning. Welcome to the Veteran Days of America. Today, I'm so honored to be here on behalf of all my colleagues who fought the Vietnam War with all Americans in Vietnam. The war in Vietnam ended almost 50 years ago, but I believe that most of us, the war of Vietnam still in our mind. Today, throughout the speech of Colonel Charles Moses and Professor James Sandy, I heard them repeat many times about the Vietnam War. So I am very excited. So this moment, I would like to introduce to you all the Vietnam members, all the Vietnam War members from ARVN who served with American soldiers in Vietnam. Would you please, all the Vietnamese soldiers who fought in Vietnam War, would you please stand up? Air Force, Navy, and Special Forces. We also to honor all the wives of the Vietnamese veterans who went with us throughout the war. Xin mời các chị đứng dậy. And you know that after the fall of Saigon, all of our colleagues were jailed by the communists in 7 years to 17 years. The last person who went out of the jail is Colonel Vaughn, Colonel Wayne Hill, 17 years. And his name now listed in the Vietnam Center as a witness of the longest war in Vietnam. And today, I would like to take a few moments. I like the word last but not least. That's important. I would like to speak shorter than Professor James Sandy about the Vietnam, the Second World War, and Colonel Charles Moses about the history of the U.S. Marine. Now, you know what? Now, in the United States, we are so honored to announce that last month, in October 2019, two events very important would happen to the Vietnamese community. We are called the Vietnamese American community. The first one is the promotion of U.S. Navy Captain Nguyễn Tử Huấn, the son of the Vietnam veteran, now were promoted to U.S. Navy's Rear Admiral. And here is a picture of Rear Admiral Huân. Okay. I would like to emphasize something about it, something like this. Rear Admiral Huân is the son of the Vietnam veteran. His father was a South Vietnam Army officer. His whole family were killed when the communists in the Tet Offensive in Saigon. 8 members were killed. He is the only person who was left. However, he was wounded. After that, he was adopted by another families in the army, and he luckily went to the United States in 1975. And in the United States, that's the good land for him to grow. And he made his way up from a student, and now he became a general of the U.S. Navy. And now he is in charge of 2,000 members of U.S. Navy. You know how much important he is? And he focused on the internet security and all the war against the United States, especially with terrorism in the world right now. Beside him, we had other members, also the general in the United States right now, that is General Lapte Flora, in charge of the cyber war. The cyber war, you know the cyber war, right? Cyber war, about the internet war. The second person, the Major General Leung, he is now the commander of the U.S. Army in Japan. They are also the son of Vietnam veteran. So I can say that the blood of the Vietnam veteran keep going on in our society, and they continue to serve in the U.S. Armed Forces everywhere. Hopefully they will contribute a lot of things to protect, to defend our freedom, great of America right now. The second thing I want to talk with you about today is, the Vietnam War ended almost 50 years. But our mission, United States mission, is continue to go to find out about MIA, right? The people who miss in action. We never forget our friend, our comrade in the war. So, very important just happened. Also happened in October 2019, just last month. On 26th of October, 81 soldiers of South Vietnam airborne were found and were buried in California. I want to tell you a little bit about this event happened. On the day of November, the date 11 of December 1965, 81 members of the South Vietnam Airborne, the most famous unit, the 7th Battalion of the South Vietnam Airborne, and 81 of them of the Company 72 were transported from the highland Pleiku down to Thi Hoa on the east side and the east coast of Vietnam. Here, all the soldiers of the Vietnam veterans who served in the war who know where were the highland and where were the east coast of Vietnam. But unfortunately, because of the bad weather or something else, the airplane will crash, and nobody at that time, nobody can come and search for the missing in action. And the U.S. Air Force in Vietnam, they took another flight to go around to look for the people. They're unable to find anything because of the weather. And they continue to search for the people. And finally, until, 1974, 1 year before the fall of Saigon, the U.S. Air Force, they found out with some Vietnamese soldiers on the ground. They searched for and they looked for and they found all the remains of the dead person, including the 4 members of the U.S. Air Force. And after that, all members of the remains were transported to Thailand, Bangkok, for the more left on who they are. And you know what? The 4 members of U.S. crew, the Air Force, were found out by the ID, and they were transported to Hawaii. Then finally, they were transported to Washington to bury in Arlington Cemetery. But unfortunately, 81 members of the South Vietnamese airborne troop, and nobody can find it because they lost all the ID. Now we had 19 ID of them, but how to find out them? It's a difficult thing. But the United States never forget the mission, the duty to help the comrades in action. That's why one member of the U.S. Navy of Marine, that is now he became the U.S. Senator, that is Senator Jim Webb. He was in Vietnam as a Marine, right? He served in Vietnam. And he also served in Da Nang, my hometown. Da Nang is the first place where the U.S. civilian men landed in Vietnam on March of 1965. And Jim Webb, after he resigned from the Senate, he felt he had obligation to help the Vietnamese people, the Vietnamese soldier. So he set up a foundation name that is Lost Soldier Foundation, and they continue to look for. And that foundation take care of all the fallen soldiers of Vietnam in that incident in the War Zone, right? And all the remains of the South Vietnamese soldiers were transported from Bangkok to Hawaii and stored there over 34 years. Nobody can try to find out, but they don't know who will die, right? Because no enough ID to do that. And last month, on the 26th of October, all of them, 81 members of the South Vietnamese troops, were transported from Hawaii to Westminster, California, to bury, with the presence of Senator Jim Webb and all the soldiers of South Vietnamese people and American soldiers in a very important ceremony right there in California. I think that is the last effort, but was so important. We never let our comrades behind. That's the mission of all the soldiers in all kinds of war, right? You agree with me? So today, I'm so honored to be back here with all of you and to emphasize on what happened to the Vietnamese community. And as a U.S. citizen right now, and all my colleagues right there, their children continue to serve in the U.S. armies, navies, Air Force, and we continue to fulfill our mission, who left behind by the war, and we continue to serve America in this kind of thing. So whatever we can do for this nation, for this great nation. Thank you very much.